Is polygamy condoned in the Bible? Well, that's a great question, and certainly one that I never thought I would be speaking to on YouTube. However, I was watching my feed the other day, and this video came up of this young woman who was making a very passionate case that even though she didn't like it, she believed that it is God's will that there should be polygamy, that there should be situations where men have multiple wives and all of this stuff. And she was trying to make that case. And I just thought, wow, we are way off base here. And so I want to talk for a moment about that. And I think that this subject really identifies a deeper problem with how people approach and interpret the Bible. And so let me lay out a few things. The first thing that I want to say very clearly is not everything that the Bible reports is something that God condones, recommends, prescribes, or authorizes. There is a ton of information in the Bible. There are a ton of accounts in the Bible of people that don't know God or that do know God that are doing things that are either a result of their sinful nature, and doing things the way that the surrounding culture does it, or some other factor, right? There's just all types of information. And when you read the Bible in context, this is super clear. God created a world in Genesis chapter 1 that was without sin. And he placed one man and one woman in a garden and told them to be fruitful and multiply. God didn't place a man and a couple of wives in there. He placed one man and one woman together and in a union that was to happen and go on for their entire lives. That's the ideal. That's the thing that we see in Scripture, which is God's. That's the plan. That's the A plan there. One man, one woman in a covenant relationship for life. Now, when you get right after the fall, you begin to see things that happen in the Bible that are reported that are bad news and things that they're not. It doesn't mean that God recommends it, condones it. In fact, what it oftentimes is the case, the information that is reported in the Bible is reported as an example. This is not what you should do. And Cain and Abel, right? After Adam and Eve were kicked out of the Garden of Eden in Genesis chapter 3, shortly thereafter, they have sons, and one of the sons murders the other one. And that is not something that is condoned by God, but it is the result of sin and the fall and evil in the world. And in the subsequent chapters of Genesis, you see an increase of evil activity. There's a character in Genesis called Lamech, and he is a violent, vengeful, evil guy, and his actions are evil, and he's evil and hostile towards his wives, plural. And so once again, just another example. Not everything that the Bible reports is something that God condones. Now, there are individuals in the Bible that God used that have multiple wives. But what you also see is you never see that dynamic being a harmonious family situation. What you see strife, and you see competition, and you see all types of negative things coming out of that. So the Bible does not condone or recommend polygamy. The examples where you have individuals taking multiple wives, the relationships in those families are negative. And then you fast forward to somebody like Solomon, after King David, one of the great kings of Israel, and his entire heart was led astray by what the Scripture talks about as him taking these foreign wives who did not worship the God of Israel. And so that situation was his downfall. And the results of that were catastrophic. And so it's just absolutely crazy, and it drives me nuts when people try to make a case for something in the Bible saying that it's God's will just because the Bible reports on something or just because the Bible talks about something that happens. And the reality of it is, with all of the people that God uses in the Bible, they're all deeply flawed except for Jesus. He's the only one, because he's the Son of God, that is not deeply flawed or flawed at all. And so every single person you see in the Bible is an individual that is flawed, is an individual that sometimes gets it wrong, is an individual that is susceptible to the cultural pressures and vices. And, it's very clear in the Bible and in the world around us that there is so much that doesn't go with the grain of what God teaches. It doesn't go with the purity and the holiness and just the general principles to love your neighbor as yourself. And so we have to have the right foundation. You can't approach the Bible with this mindset that it's like some claw machine. You just reach in there and pull something out and be like, oh, wow, this must mean that God, likes polygamy, or, that I can do all this other crazy stuff. No, not at all. It has to be read in context, and it has to be read, understanding, really the main points. And the funny thing about Scripture is when you read it in context, and when I mean read it in context, what I'm talking about there is I'm saying, considering as best as we can tell the original context, customs and culture and time as best as we can tell. We can't know all that exhaustively because these events happened, some of them 6,000 years ago. But reading that in context, and then also kind of an approach where I'm just being honest, and I'm reading it sequentially, I'm reading it in order, and I'm catching the flow. I'm not pulling some obscure detail out and making such a huge issue with it. No, I'm reading the entirety, the flow of the passage, the flow of the narrative of the chapter, of the book, and of the Scripture. And if you've never done that, let me just encourage you to start at the beginning. You can pull up an app and get the audio going to keep you on target, and read through the entire Bible. In fact, you can read through the entire Bible in about 30 days and about 2 hours a day. And it's actually not that difficult to do. And as you do that, things will stand out, and big themes will jump out of the page that you never noticed. And if we just approach the Bible just like some bird cage where there's all types of stuff swirling around in there that just seems crazy, and we don't see the bigger picture, then, we get hung up and we get high-centered on all of this stuff that really doesn't matter. Nobody should be wasting their breath on the internet trying to make some case for polygamy today. What's really going on there is you have individuals in the world today who are trying to advance some agenda. And in the case of polygamy, it's married dudes wanting to try to sleep with as many other women as they possibly can because they're reprobates, they're unregenerate, their heart is not for the things of God, but for their own gratification, man. And they're, trying to come up with doctrine to actually support, this complete crap and garbage. And so that's nothing new. Since that's nothing new and it's not going away, that's another reason why you should read the Bible in context and start making it a habit to look at the stuff that's big and clear before you try to, get hung up on some really weird or obscure thing. So just food for thought. Polygamy, no dice, not happening. So I don't know if that was helpful. If you're a polygamist, feel free to send me a death threat or something like that. I'd welcome that. But for the rest of us, peace.